Today, we're digging into Anne Campbell's really provocative book, A Mind of Her Own, and we're going to explore a fundamental and, yeah, pretty controversial question. Why are men and women, psychologically speaking, so different?
Okay, let's just jump right in with the question that's at the absolute heart of this book. I want you to really, honest to goodness, think about this for a second. What would it truly be like to see the world, to think, and to feel as a member of the opposite sex? And that question, that's the exact starting point for our source material today. We're going to unpack the scientific framework that the book builds to try and find an answer. So the book frames these persistent, observable psychological differences between men and women not as a political issue, but as a scientific puzzle, a genuine, enduring enigma that people have been trying to solve for ages. So where do we even begin? Well, first, the book takes on the classic explanation, social learning theory. You know, the idea that little boys just copy their dads and little girls just copy their moms. It sounds so simple, so intuitive, right? But here's the thing. Campbell points out that when researchers actually went looking for the evidence, study after study, dozens of them, just failed to find this consistent effect. The data wasn't there. And this leads to the book's really provocative pivot. Instead of just assuming that stereotypes create the differences between men and women, Campbell asks us to flip the script. What if? What if stereotypes are actually just imperfect, maybe exaggerated, reflections of real underlying differences? And if that's true, then we need a much, much deeper explanation. And that's where we get to the absolute core of the book's argument, a theory of difference that doesn't start in culture or society, but way, way deeper in our shared biology. The whole theory, and I mean the entire thing, kicks off with this one word, anisogamy. Now, I know it sounds super technical, but the idea is actually incredibly simple. It's a fundamental asymmetry. Female eggs are large, they're rare, and they're biologically expensive to produce. Male sperm, on the other hand, small, millions of them, and biologically cheap. According to the book, this one single difference is basically the starting pistol for everything that follows. Because that initial difference in the sex cells leads directly to this next key concept, parental investment. And this isn't just about being pregnant. It's any effort, time, food, risk that helps one of your kids survive, but that costs you the ability to put that same effort into having more kids. It's a fundamental evolutionary trade-off. And this breaks down those two sides of the trade-off perfectly. Because sperm is cheap, the male reproductive strategy tends to tilt towards quantity. Produce as many offspring as possible with low investment in each one. Biologists call that an R strategy. But because eggs, pregnancy, and child rearing are so incredibly costly, the female strategy tilts heavily towards quality. The K strategy. You have fewer offspring, but you pour a massive investment into each one to make sure they survive. Okay, so we have these two different strategies, right? Quality versus quantity. So what? Well, the book argues this has massive, and I mean massive, real-world consequences, especially when it comes to how men and women compete. For males, the theory argues competition is often direct. It's physical, it's high risk, and that's because they're competing for access to the high-investing females, and the potential evolutionary payoff for winning is just huge. It justifies the risk. And as the book points out, this pattern of direct conflict shows up again and again, across cultures, all through history. But hold on, it's not like women don't compete. Of course they do. The crucial difference is, for a woman, her own survival is absolutely paramount to her children's survival. So getting into a risky physical fight? It's an evolutionarily disastrous strategy. The competition is still fierce, but it tends to be less direct. And this quote, which is cited in the book, just nails the challenge of even studying it. How do you attach a number to calumny? How do you measure the sweetly worded put-down? And don't think for a second this indirect competition doesn't have real teeth. It absolutely does. Take this number, 35%. What's that? Well, one study cited in the book found that being physically attractive actually increases a girl's risk of being a victim of this kind of indirect aggression by 35%. Yeah, it literally puts a target on your back. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, is this just saying everything is hardwired biology and we're all just robots? And the answer is a big, fat no. The book argues against a simplistic nature versus nurture debate, and instead gives us a much more sophisticated, unified model. And it uses this fantastic metaphor to explain it. Think of the mind as a tree. The roots, buried deep down, those are our ancient, evolved emotions and psychological adaptations. The trunk, is our flexible, problem-solving intelligence. And the blossoms? That's culture. Beautiful, colorful, always changing with the seasons, but it's still fundamentally nourished by that trunk and those deep, deep roots. Okay, so that's the model. But how does this help us understand our world today? Well, it shines a pretty bright light on a modern conundrum, a change so profound it's altering the entire evolutionary game. I mean, think about it. For almost all of human history, sex and reproduction were a package deal. They were completely tied together. But then, reliable contraception came along and just snapped that ancient link in two. So, the book poses this huge question. What happens now? What happens to our psychology, which evolved for one reality, when that reality suddenly and dramatically changed? And this all leads to the book's final and maybe its most mind-bending thought about what this all means for the future of our species. And here it is. For the first time in human history, there will be a selection for women and men who want children, not just men and women who like sex. Just let that sink in for a minute. The actual evolutionary pressures are shifting, right now, in our lifetime. When every child can be a choice, the desire to have a child becomes, for the very first time, a trait that can be directly selected for. A pretty profound idea to end on.